Daenerys Targaryen is, without a doubt, one of the most loved characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not hard to imagine why, given her story is one where you can't help but root for her. She has this entire rags to riches storyline, going from a girl who is scared, abused, and reliant on the vicious men around her, to a new age Targaryen conqueror, who is vicious in her own right. A fierce queen and the first in her family after hundreds of years to have access to the lost power of dragons. Which only came about as the result of a series of unfortunate events and luck. Maybe even fate, considering how closely tied the Targaryens are to magic and the power of prophecy. Either way, her story is not one to scoff at. Daenerys is filled with intrigue, political, magical, violent, and I would say most importantly, romantic. Since the very beginning of the series, there have always been questions about who Daenerys is going to end up with, and for good reason. She's arguably one of, if not the most desired woman on the planet, and who her partner ends up being is fairly important because of how few the Targaryens are in number, and any children she has would extend the family line and possibly have a claim to her dragons. Daenerys has had a lot of potential partners. When she was younger, she thought she would marry her brother Viserys due to Targaryen custom. Then she was married off to Khal Drogo. Jorah Mormont is obsessed with her, Daario ends up catching her interest, then you have Quentyn Martell and young Griff who want to marry her as well. Now, out of all of these people, I would say Khal Drogo has to be Daenerys' most iconic pairing in A Song of Ice and Fire. I know Jon Snow is also pretty iconic, but that relationship really only exists in the show, and with Jon still being dead in the books, who knows if or when that relationship will really come about, but I digress. Like I was saying, Khal Drogo is one of her more iconic pairings in the series, and there are a few reasons for this. On one hand, it's definitely in no small part due to its portrayal by Jason Momoa in Game of Thrones. He is a phenomenal actor who gave a lot of fire and passion to the role and really brought Drogo to life. He definitely has a commanding presence and a way to pull you in. He sells the guy and his connection to Daenerys. In addition to that, Khal Drogo is also at the center of Daenerys' story as a character. He's the first person she ever really cares for in the romantic sense, and it's with Drogo that we get some actual growth and progress for her character. She becomes more confident with him, she can stand up for herself more, and give commands. She fights back against Viserys for the first time with him, and it's because of her time with Khal Drogo and the Dothraki that she really starts learning what it means to lead people. However, despite being an overall net positive to Dany and her journey to becoming a ruler, by no means can I call the relationship between Dany and Khal Drogo a love story. And I know that's going to sound strange to some of you, considering the relationship is definitely portrayed that way, and I would even say that Khal Drogo is kind of made to seem like he's her first love. She names a dragon after him, she misses him, thinks about him, their unborn son Rhaego, and she has some fond memories about the time they spent together. But I don't believe those things alone really speak to the positivity of this relationship like some people believe it does. In fact, I would say it's honestly a bit surprising how people tend to forget, or ignore, how horrific this relationship really was for Daenerys. I mean, the whole relationship starts with Daenerys being sold off by her older brother to this strange warlord like a bag of flour. Daenerys expresses many times that she doesn't want to marry him for the sake of Viserys' plan, to which he responds that she doesn't have a choice, and that if necessary, he let Drogo, his entire Khalasar, and their horses have their way with Dany if it meant getting that army. So already, this isn't some respectable proposal. She's being introduced to this idea of being with the man she doesn't know, doesn't care for, is scared of, and the prospect of a lengthy abuse by her brother. Now you can say, well, just because the foundation of the marriage wasn't really a good one, that doesn't mean the entire relationship is that way. People can have an arranged marriage and still grow to love one another, and that's definitely how things are presented in this scenario. Or at least, that's what people tend to take away from this pairing. That, sure, Dany got bartered off, which sucks, but it worked out because she found someone who eventually cared for her, and she cared for in return. But once again, I call that care, and I say that with air quotes, into question because for a decent portion of the relationship, Daenerys did not like to be with Drogo. and in fact was regularly abused by him. This is not a case of two people doing their duty for a common goal, and then gradually forming a connection based on a mutual understanding of each other. Daenerys is being exploited. She's essayed on their wedding night and multiple times after. She's in pain every time she's with Drogo, and while eventually she does come around to him, it's not because she's suddenly in love. It's about making the best out of a bad situation so she can survive. And to cope, she convinces herself that she is in love, even though she's not. In my opinion, I feel that people really like to tone down the negatives of this relationship in the beginning for the sake of how Daenerys views it by the end. It's strange that this is romanticized not just by Dany, but members of the audience. People who refuse to acknowledge a lot of the harm that really happened here. And I've seen this. I actually made a video ages ago about what I thought might have happened if Khal Drogo lived. And in that video, I did touch on some of the negatives of this relationship. Then I actually had comments stating that Drogo's brutality was actually played up in the show, and that in the books, he was better to Daenerys. He asked her for consent on their wedding night and never violated her. The latter part is just not true in the slightest. And in regards to the former, I think people take this too far in regards to painting Drogo, and therefore the whole relationship, in a more positive light. In the show, Daenerys only cries during their wedding night. There's very little conversation between her and Drogo, and despite her tears, Drogo just doesn't seem to care as he takes her. But in the books, Drogo does seem to ask for permission from Daenerys, and Daenerys says yes and gives him consent on their wedding night. But like I said, people take this moment and act as if it's evidence for how good Drogo actually was to Dany, and he really wasn't. They completely ignore the context around that yes. Daenerys really has no choice in this marriage. From her POV, she literally can't say no even if she wants to. She is being forced into this by her brother Viserys, who needs an army to take back Westeros. And in her mind, she's thinking that it's her duty as a Targaryen to do this for her brother. And that's not even mentioning the potential fear of what might happen to her if she does say no. If Khal Drogo doesn't hurt her, then what will Viserys do? Especially since he's showcased that he's not above acts of violence against his own sister. And then a major thing that some people tend to ignore that undercuts this idea of consent and Drogo being gentle is the fact that in the books, Dany is 13 years old when she gets married to Drogo, who is also a man in his 30s. So you have a child that is faced with not only a grown man, but a seasoned warlord who has seemingly never lost a battle, and then an older brother who is not known for being gentle with her either. So this idea that Dany could have wanted this in any capacity or had any kind of options here doesn't really make sense. Not to mention, even if we do give the scenario the benefit of the doubt and say that Khal Drogo was gentle and cared about how Daenerys felt, it only seems like it was for that one night, because every time they're together after that, it is not enjoyable for Dany. She even states herself how bad it is being with Drogo, and I'm actually going to plug in an excerpt from a Game of Thrones, which takes place in her third POV chapter. Khal Drogo ignored her when they rode, as he had ignored her during their wedding night, and spent his evenings drinking with his warriors and blood riders, racing his pride's horses, watching women dance, and men die. Dany had no place in these parts of his life. She was left to sup alone, or with Ser Jorah and her brother, and afterward cry herself to sleep. Yet every night, sometime before dawn, Drogo would come to her tent and wake her in the dark, to ride as relentlessly as he did his stallion. He always took her from behind, Dothraki fashion, for which she was grateful. That way her lord husband could not see the tears that wet her face. And that's just a portion of what she's dealing with in that chapter. Dany also goes on to say how she uses a pillow to muffle her cries of pain, and how Drogo leaves her sore and bruised each time, to the point where she can't even sleep. It's also so bad that she even contemplates taking her own life, because in her mind, that is much better than dealing with Drogo. Once again, Dany is 13 when all of this is happening to her. So just imagine how much smaller she is in comparison to this warlord, and it'll really put into context how rough this really is on her, mentally and physically. This also shows that Drogo is not this considerate individual that some people think he is based on the wedding night. Dany herself says he isn't, and even if she never vocalized her displeasure with Drogo through conversation, she definitely vocalized it in moments like this. Drogo just doesn't care. And Daenerys also says this, because after each time they're together, Drogo just goes to sleep like it's nothing. This gentle warlord does not exist in the books, or show, no matter how you try and spin it. And you can say that while the relationship didn't start off well, and even if we ignore the fact that Dany is 13 in an arranged marriage, she fell in love with Drogo, and he respects her and cares for her. He listened to her when she wanted to stop the women of Lazarene from being attacked. He killed Viserys after he threatened her and their unborn child. He swore vengeance on the Seven Kingdoms after the assassination attempt on her. Clearly, he does care in some capacity. Now, I'm not going to say that Khal Drogo doesn't have actual feelings for Daenerys, and that he doesn't truly respect her, because by the brutal standards of the Dothraki, he does treat her better than most, at least given some time into their relationship. And not to mention, multiple things can be true at the same time. Just because Khal Drogo defends Daenerys against violent men does not mean he himself is not a violent man. Just because he killed the first man to abuse Daenerys doesn't mean that he is not an abuser himself. Dany can also be a victim whether she recognizes that about herself or not. There can be positives as well as negatives. Drogo can be a terrible person and he can still care about his wife Daenerys, despite how problematic some things are. Then, I would also say that even if we don't acknowledge certain complexities about this relationship, and say that they do truly love each other, and there is no foul play or anything to be considered, I believe Drogo's love has limitations, and he's not the guy who's willing to do anything and everything for Dany because he killed some people and promised her a metal chair on another continent. Khal Drogo, as I've already said, is a vicious and brutal man no matter how you spin it, and he takes pride in the Dothraki culture. He enjoys killing people, absorbing other Khalasars, conquering, and much more. He has taken slaves and, as per his culture, allows his men to violate and abuse women as they see fit, like when he kills Khal Drogo and absorbs his Khalasar. People like to say that because he allowed Dany to stop the attack on the women, that Khal Drogo respects her so much. But let's be honest when we talk about how much he actually respects her. Do we really think that Khal Drogo would have allowed her to do this continuously? Despite how likely it was that his people would become more and more agitated as a result of this, and he would be more prone to challenge because people are unsatisfied with him taking orders from his wife. Even if Khal Drogo could beat every challenger that came his way, does it make sense to say that he would reform the Dothraki based on his feelings for Dany alone? I mean, even after she voices her displeasure with how his men conduct themselves after everything that happened, Drogo tries to make Daenerys understand that this is their way of life before he eventually gives in to her. And after she succeeds in this and is almost killed later on, Drogo goes into this whole raving speech about what he's planning to do to the people of Westeros after they dare to attack Dany and their unborn child. He says that he'll give her the Iron Throne, but that he's also going to kill their men, assault their women, and take their children as slaves. And we know from Dany's story that she hates things like this. She hates the exploitation of people in general. Men, women, children, and yet this is what Drogo plans to do. In fact, he has most likely done this many times before he even met Daenerys. If they're so in love, do you really think that Dany would be able to steer him on another path if they invaded Westeros? To spare the women and children at the very least, even though that means turning his back on the brutal culture he's upheld for so long. And if he didn't want to, what would Daenerys do then? What power does she really have in this relationship if she and Drogo aren't on the same page? I think we like to believe that, based on the few positive interactions that we had with him before his death, but in truth, it could be a very different story if he stuck around longer. Now, I'm making this video not to demonize Khal Drogo without reason, and say that there aren't certain layers to this relationship, but really to expose that the guy is far from being a good man. Not only is he far from being a good man, his relationship with Dany is not a good one and should not be put on a pedestal, even if she herself does this in the story. I mean, you can like Khal Drogo as a character, but you still have to be honest about the guy and the situation. This is not a Beauty and the Beast scenario or an I can fix him situation. Even with the positives that did come out of this relationship in regards to the growth of Dany as a character, that shouldn't wash out that this was still a terrible period in her life. And this idea of love that she has for Drogo is really questionable if you ask me. And I think it's very easy for people to forget this for a few reasons. In regards to the books, you see things through Daenerys' eyes, and she has a bias towards Drogo as the story moves forward. So when you put yourself in her headspace and see how she understands, rationalizes, and even remembers the relationship, you can also adopt that mentality to a certain extent. Then in regards to the show, I think people have such a high opinion for Khal Drogo because, frankly, they make it a bit easier to like him. For one, as I said earlier, Jason Momoa is a very talented actor and also an attractive man, so seeing him on screen can cause people to have a disconnect with the horridness of his character, especially when Dany starts falling for him. And I know that may sound crazy, but trust me, I have seen it, how people are willing to excuse certain actions because a person looks good. Then I would also say that it's because we're watching a TV show that it makes it easier to like him. Simply because we're not restricted to Daenerys' POV anymore. We get to see the emotions on Drogo's face and how he embraces her, the fire of this character. And as a result, it makes it easier to connect with him and even excuse some of his more deplorable actions because of the actors' chemistry with each other on screen. Then, in that same vein, Dany is also aged up in the show, so you lose out on the huge disparity between the characters. Not just mentally, but physically as well. Dany is still young, I think she's about 17, but she looks more grown than she would in the books. So compare show Dany to seeing a child who's probably just started puberty and this hulking mass of a man on screen get married and have a wedding night. It would definitely make people feel more grimy about the situation and less keen to come up with excuses for Drogo and why the relationship was actually a loving one. And before anyone says it, because there's always someone who does say it, even if it is the time period and certain things like arranged or child marriage are accepted, that doesn't make them free of judgment or scrutiny, even if our world and morals are more modern than theirs. At least not all the time. It also doesn't change the fact that regardless of what we think or what is right, Daenerys is still a child forced into a relationship with a vile and violent man, and is regularly being harmed to the point that she considers ending her own life. That is a problem. So, in conclusion, Khal Drogo and Daenerys is a pretty iconic pairing. There are some decent moments between them that showcase a deeper connection, but by no means is this something to really romanticize or hold to a romantic standard, even if we take the time period and character development for Dany into consideration. But you guys let me know your thoughts down below. For now, don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button. It really means a lot. And I will see you all next time.